The hospital is forced to notify the police about you. Leave right away if you don't want it, and I'll overlook this. The hospital director essentially dismissed me after falsely accusing me of a crime I didn't commit because I challenged his son, my coworker, about his misbehavior. How pitiful to be dismissed. However, that is the result of sticking your nose in the wrong place. Take this as a lesson. You are worthless and should know your position going forward. As I was leaving the hospital, his kid told me that nobody could have predicted that this episode would lead to a serious one that would rock the institution to its foundations. I'm Ryan James, and I work at a university hospital as a surgeon. After seeing a patient's condition during surgery, I've been a doctor for nearly 10 years and have noticed even the smallest alterations. I can never forget them. I've never caused any complications as a result, and the hospital claims that my success record is the highest in its history. However, not everyone in my immediate vicinity valued my presence. Among them was fellow surgeon Chan Adams. He is my age, talented and well-liked by both patients and staff. However, few people are aware of his actual character. "Ryan, could you cover my afternoon shift?" he asked me out of the blue as I was getting ready to leave for home after my morning rounds. His patients would become confused if he made a last-minute switch. I asked him why, wondering if he had an urgent matter to attend to, but he scowled. "Is it really that important? Why don't you just cover for me?" "Wait, hold on a second." Sean didn't say anything more before heading home, before I could receive an explanation. I was so overcome with guilt that I was forced to inform his patients that Dr. Adams had unexpectedly become ill. A few hours later, I saw a nurse wearing more fashionable clothing than normal as she arrived for her evening duty. She was quickly surrounded by other nurses who wanted to know what was happening. She added, "Actually, I had lunch with Sean today," and the nurses gave her a sympathetic nod. I was unable to speak. Sean had taken a lunch date with her instead of working his afternoon shift. I questioned him the following day regarding the lunch incident and the trouble it had caused his patients. He looked irritated but didn't hesitate to admit it. Building relationships with the nurses is important, but you need to put your patients first. Enough. Are you really giving me a lecture? I'm the director's son, in case you forgot. He was the only son of the hospital director, but so what? He didn't have the authority to disregard his patients because he wasn't the director himself. I know that, but that's precisely why you should put your patients' needs ahead of your own. Don't be too arrogant. You're not the director. I'm just expressing what any doctor should say. Before I could finish, Sean muttered to himself, "This is such a hassle," and left the room. I was called into the director's office later that day. A stack of papers was thrust at me by Dr. Adams. "We found evidence that you've been embezzling money from the hospital." I was shocked by the charge. Naturally, I had never engaged in such behavior, and I was unaware that embezzlement was even a problem. "There must be a mistake here. I don't recall ever doing anything like that." "Don't act foolish. We have all the proof we require. We looked into it thoroughly because I've heard you're not happy with the hospital's policies." "Are you unhappy? You questioned the future director, Sean, didn't you?" At last it made sense. They wanted to get rid of me. Sean had gone to his father. "The hospital is forced to report you to the police, which is regrettable. Leave right away if you don't want it, and I'll overlook this." I knew better than to believe him when he said he would overlook it. He would be in more trouble if the police looked into it and found the fake proof. This was his method of evicting me while pretending to be kind. Although that might pose issues for the patients, I wouldn't mind involving the police more significantly. Even if I were to survive this, it would probably happen again. Cutting all connections is preferable. I made the decision to leave the hospital in light of that. Sean was standing in the director's office as I left with a smug smirk. He gave me a shoulder pat. "How pitiful to be dismissed, but when you try to get in my way, that's what happens. Take this as a reminder to recognize where you belong going forward. You are nothing at all. Is there really such a thing as status for a doctor whose mission is to help the sick? There's no point in trying to explain a doctor's duty to someone like him who's already learned how to wield power. I gave up on talking to him and began preparing to hand over my patients. A few days later, I left the hospital with many of the other doctors and nurses expressing their regret, but I was left questioning what it really meant to be a doctor. In the end, is it all about money and power? Are there other doctors out there who see their patients as nothing more than tools for making money? How do people like that end up in positions of power? Or maybe it's because they gained power that they became dependent on it. What should I do from here? What if I find myself in another hospital with people like Sean and Dr. Adams? The thought of that made me not want to think about the future, but I couldn't keep going like this to clear my head. I decided to take a trip. I visited a remote village in the mountains famous for its waterfall, which was a popular tourist spot. The tourist season had already passed, so there weren't many people around, and the parking lot had plenty of open spaces. I parked my car at the visitor center and went inside to grab some brochures and a map of the area. The building was clean, well-maintained, and comfortably air-conditioned, perfect for a quick break. As I browsed the pamphlets, a woman approached me. "Where are you headed today?" Her friendly smile was so natural that, for a moment, I thought she might be an actress I didn't recognize. I even wondered if there was a film crew nearby. But then I noticed the name tag hanging from her chest, City Planning Committee, Harris. It seemed she was a staff member here. "Oh, I was thinking of seeing the waterfall and the cave," I replied. "I see. Are you driving?" "Yes, I am. In that case, if you take this route, there's a free parking lot you can use." It had been a while since I'd spoken with a woman outside of my patients and the nurses, and I found myself oddly nervous. It was probably because she was so beautiful. Anyone who came to this visitor center would surely be surprised by her presence. After getting directions, I set off to see the waterfall. Luckily, there was no one else around. The cool breeze and mist from the waterfall gave me a much-needed sense of calm and refreshment. Before heading to my lodging, I decided to stop by the visitor center again to thank her. Maybe I just wanted someone to share how beautiful the place was with. I parked in the same spot and went inside, but the atmosphere inside had completely changed from just a few hours earlier. "Sarah, what happened?" "She might be having a panic attack." "Someone get a plastic bag." It seemed like someone had fallen ill. I couldn't help but move closer, my instincts as a doctor kicking in. "Excuse me, is everything okay? What happened?" "Who are you?" "I'm just a tourist, but I'm a licensed physician." "What? Then please come quickly." My words caused those around me to push me toward the center of the commotion. The person struggling to breathe was none other than the woman with the beautiful smile. She had suddenly collapsed, writhing in pain. I checked her pulse, noting that she was unable to speak. "We need to act quickly. This could be dangerous. Is there a hospital nearby?" "There's a clinic." "That'll do. I'll take her there. Please call the clinic and inform them. Also, if anyone witnessed what happened, I'd appreciate it if they could come with us." Handling emergencies was part of my daily routine, so even after all this time, I remained calm. As I drove, I learned that she had a chronic condition, which was why she lived in this quiet, clean-air village, avoiding more urban areas. We arrived at the clinic with a sign that read Miller Clinic, and I spoke with Dr. Miller, the director. Together, we immediately began treating her. Fortunately, the clinic was well equipped for a small facility, and her condition soon stabilized. "I must say I'm impressed by your quick thinking and prompt action. You mentioned you're a licensed doctor, but where are you practicing now?" The older doctor, his hair graying, gave me a warm smile. After I explained that I had recently left my position, Dr. Miller looked at me closely. "Wait a minute, aren't you Ryan?" "Do you know me?" Of course, I've attended conferences where you've spoken, and I've read your papers. I never imagined I'd meet someone so well known like you. I'm flattered, I replied, bowing my head. Then Dr. Miller asked if I had a family. When I told him I was unmarried, he made an unexpected offer. He invited me to work at the clinic. I could hardly contain my excitement. I had always thought about working at a clinic rather than a large hospital someday. The opportunity to work in such a beautiful place was more than I could have ever hoped for. I quickly accepted his offer, and Dr. Miller promised to arrange a place for me to live. Just then, the door to the clinic burst open. "Dr. Miller, how's Sarah?" "Ah, Anthony. She's fine now, thanks to this young man who happened to be here." Dr. Miller introduced me to the man. He was Sarah's father, Anthony Harris, the village mayor. "I can't thank you enough for saving my daughter. I'm just glad I was there at the right time," I replied. Anthony shook my hand firmly and began telling me about his daughter. Sarah had been suffering from a serious illness since childhood, and unfortunately, there was still no cure. The only thing that could be done was to manage her symptoms. Since large hospitals hadn't been able to help, the family decided she should at least live in a stress-free environment, which was why she had returned to the village where she was born and raised. The clinic's advanced equipment had been purchased by Anthony specifically for Sarah's care to ensure they could act swiftly if needed. I was touched by how much she was loved. I checked in with Sarah, asking if she still felt unwell, and decided it would be best for her to stay at the clinic overnight for observation. "Thank you so much for everything," Anthony said again. "No, I should be the one thanking you. The waterfall was beautiful. It really helped me find some peace." "I'm glad to hear that." I turned to Sarah. "Have you considered undergoing tests at a larger hospital? Your father mentioned that your last major examination was 5 years ago. There's a chance your condition may have worsened, and there might be newer treatments available now that could help." "No, I'm fine," Sarah responded weakly, shaking her head. "I don't want my father to spend any more money on me. If this illness can't be cured, there's no point in extending my life and becoming a burden to him." "Please don't say that. Your father wants you to live, but it's painful knowing I can't live much longer. How is that fair to anyone?" "Sarah, even if your time is short, I believe you deserve to be happy. That's why we all want you to live as long as possible." "Happiness, that's something I'll never have. There's no rule that says you can't be happy just because you're sick. You should live even if it's just for one more day, to see beautiful things, eat delicious food, and experience moments that move your heart. That's what your father and everyone else wants for you. You should live to find that happiness." A silence settled between us. Not wanting to push her too hard, I quickly added, "I'm sorry if I came off as pushy." "No, it's just, no one has ever told me I should live. I've always felt like people were avoiding saying something as direct as live. Some people might feel it's bad luck to say it out loud, but as a doctor, I can say it. I want you to live. I'll do everything I can to help make that happen." "Thank you." Sarah smiled at me. It was a different smile from the first time we met, still tinged with sadness, but it didn't feel hopeless. After that, I began researching Sarah's illness. It was a rare disease that I had only heard of in passing, and due to its rarity, there hadn't been much exploration into effective treatments. I found a few cases from overseas, but the information was scarce, making it a challenging task. After settling into the village, I spent my days off contacting fellow doctors and mentors, gathering any information I could. By giving her medication that helped ease her symptoms and increasing her checkups, we were able to prevent her from having any more sudden attacks. She used to struggle with shortness of breath every 2 to 3 months, but the frequency had noticeably decreased. As a thank you for my help, Sarah began showing me around scenic spots that were either popular tourist attractions or known only to locals. As expected from someone who worked at the visitor center, her explanations were clear and engaging. It's been so long since I've gone out like this and enjoyed myself without pushing my limits. I'm really grateful to you, Dr. James. See, there are good things about being alive, aren't there? Yes, truly. As I gazed out at the distant sea from the observation deck, I suddenly felt a pair of eyes on me. Sarah was looking at me. Is something wrong? I asked. Huh. Oh no, it's nothing. Sarah blushed and looked away. I touched my face, wondering if something was on it, but couldn't figure it out. Her illness hadn't been cured, but as her heart grew stronger, her smiles became even brighter. She laughed easily, and the village elders, already fond of her, showered her with even more affection. Mayor Anthony often told me, "It's all thanks to Dr. James," which made me proud as a doctor. After all, seeing a patient's health improve is the greatest reward for us. However, late at night, whenever I looked at Sarah, I felt a growing tightness in my chest. At first, I admired her beauty and grace from a distance, but the more time we spent together, the more those feelings began to shift into something deeper, romantic feelings. I wondered how she saw me. At the very least, I didn't think she disliked me. In fact, there were times I caught her looking at me. It could be wishful thinking, but maybe she felt the same. I decided that when I dropped Sarah off at her house after her hospital visit, I would confess my feelings. The atmosphere in the car was tense, and I wasn't sure if it was because she could sense my nerves. By the way, didn't your father mention something about you needing to come home early today? Is there something going on? I started with small talk, but Sarah's expression darkened instantly. There's a visitor coming today. I see, I said. It seemed like someone she didn't want to meet. She let out a heavy sigh. When we arrived at her house and she stepped out of the car, I finally gathered the courage to speak. Before I leave, there's something I need to tell you. But before I could finish, Sarah interrupted me. There's something I need to tell you too, Dr. James. Please forget about me. Her sudden words stopped me in my tracks. Forget about you? What do you mean? Don't worry, I haven't given up on living, but soon we won't be able to see each other anymore. I didn't understand what she meant. Was she moving far away? If so, I should be celebrating her new journey, but I couldn't understand why she told me to forget her. I see, but I can't forget you. To me, you're someone very special. Excuse me, but could you stop flirting with my fiancé? A voice interrupted from behind, and I turned around. Both the speaker and I were equally shocked to see each other. Wait, Ryan Shan, Dr. Adams. Standing there were the very people who had forced me out of my last job, the father and suitor from the hospital. What are you doing here? I should be asking you the same, Dr. Adams snapped. To think it's you who's been making advances on Sarah. There was that word, fiancé. Could it be? Sarah is my fiancé. Now that you know, why don't you make yourself scarce? Dr. Adams sneered. Engaged to Sean. The shock of hearing those words hit me so hard that I couldn't muster a response. With no other option, I left just as he demanded. The next day, Sean deliberately came by during my work hours. So this is where you've ended up, working at this rundown clinic. How far have you fallen? I wanted to say, whose fault do you think that is? But more than that, I was furious at how he mocked the clinic. This clinic is an important place for the people of this village. Is that so? Well, it won't be around much longer, maybe a year at most. What do you mean by that? Sean smirked as he replied, Once I marry Sarah, I'll own most of the land in this village. Since I'll be the son-in-law of the mayor, I'm planning to build a large resort hotel here. These old, run-down buildings will be demolished in no time. What? And by the way, he continued, were you really thinking of making a move on Sarah yesterday? Do you honestly believe you're good enough for her? His words made me recall something. I didn't know how long Sarah had been his fiancée, But back when I worked at the hospital, Sean frequently went on dates with other women. What was that all about then? Sean, weren't you often seen with multiple women before? Oh, that? Yeah, I still have plenty of women back home, he said with a shameless grin. I couldn't believe how proudly he was saying this. You have other women. What about Sarah? You're supposed to be marrying her. Sarah? She's just a rural girl. I'm only marrying her for the land rights. From what I've heard, she's pretty sick anyway, which works out perfectly for me. I nearly lost control and longed at him out of anger, but I restrained myself. If I hit him now, I'd only cause trouble for Dr. Miller, who had been looking out for me, and I'd lose the trust of the villagers. You might want to start looking for another job while you still can, Sean sneered. It seems anyone who gets involved with me ends up in trouble. With a smug laugh, he walked away, and all I could do was watch, gritting my teeth in frustration. Ever since Sean came to our house to discuss the engagement arrangements, I haven't seen Dr. James. Even when I visit the clinic or walk around the village, it's as if he's disappeared, like he was never really here in the first place. Dr. Miller told me he's taking a few days off, so I'm hoping he'll return soon. But I can't help but worry. What if he doesn't come back at all? I know I'm the cause of all this. Even though I was engaged to Sean, I acted in ways that made Dr. James think I had feelings for him, and when he was about to tell me how he felt, I told him to forget me. What if he's grown tired of me and left the village for good? What if he never wants to see my face again? When I was introduced to Sean, I didn't care who I married because I thought I wouldn't live much longer anyway. His family is wealthy, so I was sure they could help my father. If it meant my father could live more comfortably, even though I'm the one suffering from an illness, that's why I agreed to the engagement so easily. I knew Sean didn't care about me as a person. He just wanted the status of marrying the mayor's daughter, but that didn't bother me. I lost my mother early on, and my father raised me alone. If this could be a way to repay him, I didn't care about my own feelings or clinging to life. But then I met Dr. James, and I began to wonder, maybe I could be happy too. A few days ago, I gathered the courage to ask my father, is it okay for me to be happy? He held me close and said, your happiness is what matters most to me. It's also what your mother would have wanted. That's when I realized if I want to find happiness in the little time I have, it's with Dr. James. He gave me hope, taught me what it meant to truly care for others. He's a kind man, always taking every patient's worries as seriously as his own. How wonderful it would be to live by his side. But now it's too late. The engagement can't be undone, and I've hurt him deeply. Seeing me will only cause him pain now. So I'll smile and accept this marriage for my father's sake. At the very least, that's the only thing left I can do. The engagement ceremony is being held at a fancy restaurant. Everything is prepared, and the two families are facing each other. I can see the beautiful engagement gifts on display, but they hold no appeal to me. This whole ceremony is nothing but agony for me. Sean's father gives a speech, and I listen absent-mindedly. There's some commotion outside. I glance toward the entrance, and others follow my gaze. Just then, the sliding door flies open with a loud bang. Standing there, disheveled and in dirty clothes, was Dr. James. Dr. James? Do you even know where you are? Sean and his father both stood up, shouting insults at him, calling him rude and demanding he leave. The restaurant staff rushed over, trying to escort him out. My father and I could only watch in stunned silence. I found it. A treatment for Sarah. Dr. James shouted. What? There's a doctor in Germany who successfully treated a patient with the same condition just last month, a treatment that was never available before. That can't be. I went to meet that doctor and talk to them. Did Dr. James really go to Germany for me? We can treat this, Sarah. What do you want to do? I stood up and shouted back at him. I want to be treated. Ryan, what are you talking about? Sean's grip tightened on my arm. Just because there's a success case in Germany doesn't mean anything. Are you going to take her there? The cost would be astronomical. No, Dr. James said firmly. I'll do it. As soon as he said that, Sean and his father burst into mocking laughter. Just because you heard about it? Impossible. Don't make such ridiculous claims. Don't get ahead of yourself. What could a small-town doctor possibly achieve? Don't tell me you still believe that nonsense about being a genius surgeon back at the hospital. There was a time when my high surgical success rate earned me the nickname genius surgeon at the hospital. But I had never let that nickname get to my head. I'm not arrogant. I made my decisions based on my skills and experience. I trust my abilities. Now all that matters is whether Sarah and Anthony trust me. I trust you, Anthony said firmly. And Sarah, what about you? Of course, I trust you, Dr. James. I'm counting on you. The patient has spoken. You have no right to stop this, I said, turning to Sean and his father. Leaving behind their bitter glares, I returned to the clinic and began planning the surgery with Dr. Miller. On the day of the surgery, as we were preparing, Sarah spoke to me. Dr. James, I'm sorry. I did something terrible to you. Something terrible. I didn't tell you about my fiancé. Oh, that. It's fine. Remember what I said. I just want you to be happy. As long as you're happy, that's all that matters. You've given me a reason to believe in being a doctor again, Sarah. You reminded me of the importance of saving patients. For that, you're my benefactor. If the surgery is successful, I think I'll be able to live longer. But I'll tell you the rest after the surgery. All right? I'll make sure the surgery is a success so you can tell me everything later. After 6 hours, the surgery was a success. As Sarah and Anthony hugged, tears of joy streamed down their faces. We're not entirely out of the woods yet, but with continued treatment, you won't need to worry about the illness anymore, I assured them. Dr. James, thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony said, shaking my hand with deep gratitude. Just like the first time we met, Dr. Miller and I exchanged glances, silently acknowledging our success. The next day, while Sarah was recovering in her hospital room, Sean and his father came to visit. So, the surgery was a success, I hear. Congratulations, Sean said. Thank you, Sean, Sarah replied. Do you think you'll still make it to the engagement ceremony, even though it's been delayed by 2 weeks? At this, Sarah shook her head. No, I won't be marrying Sean. What? Sean's forced smile faltered. I want to live my life with Dr. James, who saved both my body and my heart, Sarah declared. She looked directly at me as she said this. Was she really choosing me? Oh, come on. What are you talking about? You're just tired after the surgery, Sean said, laughing nervously. But Sarah spoke firmly. No, I'm fully aware of what I'm saying. Anthony, your daughter is saying something ridiculous. You need to talk some sense into her, Sean's father urged. Anthony nodded, but his response wasn't what they expected. Sean, I'm sorry, but we need to cancel this engagement. What? What are you talking about? Last night, I talked to Sarah. I realized her happiness lies with someone who truly values her. And you're saying my son doesn't value her. I know he's only interested in the family's wealth. That's why we'll also be canceling the donation to your hospital. Instead, we'll be using it to renovate this clinic. What are you talking about? Sean's father spluttered. It's all out in the open now. I think it's best for both families, Anthony said calmly. I stepped forward, facing Sean and his father directly. The embezzlement evidence you showed me back at the hospital, it was fabricated, wasn't it? In reality, it's proof that you both were involved in embezzlement, and without anyone around to speak up after I was gone, you continued your schemes. I've also heard that 6 months ago, Sean pinned a major medical error he made on another doctor. On what basis are you making these accusations? Sean's father demanded. With the network Dr. Miller and I have, gathering this information wasn't difficult, I said. Outside the hospital room, I saw Dr. Miller nodding in agreement. We're gathering evidence from the doctors and patients who were affected. I'm sure a lawsuit is coming soon, and it's unlikely you'll be able to settle this privately. Hey, don't just make things up, Sean shouted, grabbing me by the collar. I twisted his wrist back in response. Who's the one acting recklessly here? Ouch, ouch. Sean winced. You turned the hospital into your personal playground, thinking only of your own gain. A hospital isn't meant for that. Who do you think you are, acting like a king just because you're the director's son? Anyway, you two should hurry back to the hospital and start looking for a lawyer. You'll need one soon enough. Sean and his father exchanged glances before hurriedly leaving the clinic. Dr. Miller and Anthony, sensing it was time, also stepped out of the room, leaving Sarah and me alone. Sarah, are you really sure about this? About me? I don't want anyone but you, Dr. James. And is it really okay for you? Do you want to be with me? I don't want anyone but you, Sarah. We both smiled at each other. I apologized for going to Germany without telling her, and she apologized again for keeping her engagement a secret. Then we talked about our future together. The way Sarah's eyes lit up when she spoke about what was ahead made her look even more beautiful. 2 weeks later, more evidence of the Addams family's wrongdoing surfaced. There was no way they could win the trial, and they were expelled from the hospital. They were hit with numerous claims for damages and compensation, eventually leading them to declare bankruptcy and lose their home. It's said that finding another job in the medical field is nearly impossible for them now, and they've lost everything, left wandering with nowhere to go. Apparently, there wasn't a single person willing to help them. Their past actions had finally caught up with them. A year later, thanks to Anthony's donation, the Miller Clinic underwent a major renovation. A few years later, the clinic had grown into a fully equipped hospital with more staff and advanced medical technology. After Dr. Miller retired, I took over as the director. The hospital became well known, not just as a tourist destination, but as a place where people could receive high-level medical care. By that time, Sarah and I had gotten married. With her illness cured, Sarah now works part-time at the visitor center during the day and helps with administrative work at the hospital in the evenings. I keep reminding her not to overwork herself, but she's so excited to be able to move freely again that she can't help it. Seeing her so full of life motivates me to work even harder. I believe that being a doctor means helping patients carve out a future and giving them hope, no matter how dire the situation may seem. As long as you don't give up, dreams can come true. To make as many of those dreams come true as possible, I constantly encourage the hospital staff to stay humble and always put the patients first. I firmly believe that this mindset is essential for everyone's happiness.